Every story of power has a beginning. But what if the very first story, the one that set the blueprint for all the others, was about a family, a divine family, locked in a brutal, repeating cycle of rebellion? We're going to peel back the layers of time, long before humanity, to uncover the very first cosmic war. This isn't just a myth, it's a timeless warning about how power is seized, how fear corrupts, and how every generation risks repeating the sins of the last.
To really get this, you have to try and imagine nothing, an existence the ancient Greeks called chaos. But don't think of chaos like we do, as just a total mess. Think of it as a vast, silent, limitless potential, a cosmic quiet. And out of this quiet, something began to stir, not with a big bang, but like a deep, slow breath. This was Gaia, the Earth. And she wasn't just a planet, she was the very idea of a foundation. She was solid ground in an endless void, a mother and a world all at once. For a long, long time, she was alone. But everything in creation seems to need its opposite. And so, stretching out above her, a magnificent shimmering dome of stars and light appeared. This was Uranus, the sky. He was everything she was not, vast, distant, ethereal. And together, they were the first couple. Earth below, sky above. The very architecture of reality.
So you have this perfect primordial union. It was bound to be fruitful, right? And it was. But the first children of earth and sky, well, they weren't what you'd call gentle. They were forces of nature made flesh, raw and absolutely untamed. And their sheer power would introduce the very first poison into the cosmos, fear. A fear that would take root in the heart of the Sky King himself.
Yeah, these were not the gods you see in statues. These were something else entirely. First, you had the elder Cyclopes, Brontes, whose voice was thunder, Sterops, who crackled with lightning, and Arges, the embodiment of brilliant, blinding light. Imagine a being with a single eye that burns like a miniature sun. They were cosmic blacksmiths, hammering out the raw elements of creation. And if you think that's intense, then came the Hecatonchires, the hundred-handed ones, Cottus, Briareus, and Gygas. These beings were just overwhelming, 50 heads to perceive everything, and 100 arms to enact their will. They were living tidal waves, walking earthquakes. They weren't good or evil. They were just too much, the sheer, untamable force of nature itself.
And right here, this is where it all starts to go wrong. It's all about perspective. For Gaia, these children were magnificent. They were her own strength, her own essence walking around. She looked at them and saw wondrous, beautiful power. A mother's pride, right? But Uranus looked down from his perfect, orderly sky and was terrified. He saw chaos. He saw a power that could challenge his own. He couldn't control the Cyclopes' fire or the awesome strength of the hundred-handed ones. And for a being who was control, that was unacceptable. That inability to dominate his own children planted a seed of fear that quickly grew into resentment. The love story was ending.
So what did Uranus do? Fueled by this terror, he committed an act of unbelievable cruelty. He decided if he couldn't control them, he would unbirth them. One by one, he grabbed his monstrous children and shoved them back into the depths of Gaia, back into the very womb that bore them. He buried them alive, deep within the earth, in a place of utter darkness called Tartarus. Can you even imagine the agony for Gaia? Her beloved children, now her prisoners, trapped inside her own body? Their immense power, their rage, their struggles, became a constant churning torment within her. This was the first great betrayal. The sky, once a loving partner, was now a tyrant's boot on her neck. And a mother's love, when it's wounded that deeply, can turn into something incredibly cold and dangerous.
Oppression always breeds rebellion. It's a law of nature. For what felt like an eternity, Gaia suffered, the weight of her children a constant, agonizing pressure. But pain, over time, can sharpen into a weapon. She began to plot. She was going to orchestrate the first revolution in the history of existence, a cosmic coup d'etat. And her younger children, a new generation known as the Titans, were going to be her army.
Gaia's plan was brilliantly simple and utterly ruthless. First, she needed a weapon. So she reached into her own core, and from the hardest substance in existence, she forged a massive curved sickle, a blade made of something called adamantine, unbreakable, impossibly sharp. Then, with the weapon made, she went to her younger, more civilized children, the Titans. She held up the sickle and asked, "Who among you has the courage to defy your father?" Most of them flinched. How do you fight the sky? But one of them didn't hesitate. Cronus. The youngest, the cleverest, the one who wasn't just angry, he was ambitious. He saw this not just as rescue, but as opportunity. Gaia knew he was the one. She placed the sickle in his hand, and the universe held its breath.
The moment itself was violent and world-changing. Cronus waited in ambush. When his father Uranus descended to embrace Gaia, Cronus lunged. With one terrible swing of that adamantine sickle, he attacked his father, castrating him and severing his power at its source. Uranus roared in agony and pulled away from the earth, and he never touched her again. Now, think about what that means. That single act of violence literally created the world as we know it. It created the space between the ground and the sky, the atmosphere. It gave us room to live and breathe. But this new world was born from brutality. And from the blood of Uranus that fell to the earth, new and terrible things were born. The Furies who punish oathbreakers and kinslayers. So yes, Cronus won. But the victory itself sowed the seeds of future vengeance.
So, Cronus stands victorious. The sky has been defeated. The Titans are now in charge, and Cronus, the Titan of time, is the new king of everything. And for a while, they say it was a golden age. But here's the tragedy, the absolute core of this entire story. Cronus didn't actually break the cycle of tyranny. He just took his father's spot at the top. And the first thing he did, or rather didn't do, proved it. He never freed his older brothers, the Cyclopes and the Hackathon chairs. He left them rotting in Tartarus because he feared their power, exactly like his father had. The son had become the father.
The reign of Cronus, this supposed golden age, was built on a lie. It was ruled by a king who was eaten alive from the inside out by paranoia. Think about the irony. He was the master of all time, but he was utterly terrified of the future. Every victory felt hollow because he was haunted by a single chilling warning whispered to him by the very father he had overthrown. And there it is, the curse. In these old myths, a prophecy isn't a maybe. It's a spoiler for a movie you're forced to act in. The more you struggle to get away from your fate, the faster you run right into its arms. For Cronus, these words weren't a possibility. They were a countdown. They became his obsession. He had risked everything to get out from under his father's thumb, only to spend his entire reign terrified of becoming him. The cycle was spinning up to repeat itself.
It's almost poetic in how perfectly the pattern repeats, isn't it? The parallels are just chilling. Uranus's fear came from what he saw, the monstrous power of his children. Cronus's fear came from what he heard, that damning prophecy. But both were driven by the exact same terror, being replaced. And their solutions, my God, their solutions were the same in spirit. Uranus buried his children in the earth. Cronus, taking it a step further, decided to imprison his children inside his own body. The sin of the father, repeated by the son, only this time it was somehow even more monstrous.
Cronus had married his sister, the Titaness Rhea, and soon she began to have children, a new kind of god, the Olympians. But for Rhea, every birth was a nightmare. The moment her first daughter, Hestia, was born, Cronus snatched the baby and swallowed her whole. Then came Demeter. He swallowed her too. Then Hera, Hades, Poseidon. One by one, Rhea would give birth, feel a moment of a mother's joy, and then watch in horror as her husband consumed their child. They were alive, trapped in the darkness inside him, but utterly helpless. Rhea's life became an endless loop of creation and loss.
Rhea was completely broken, but just like her own mother, Gaia, that deep, soul-crushing pain eventually forged itself into a plan. The cycle of tyranny had gone on long enough. It was time for another rebellion, and with the quiet, ancient guidance of Gaia herself, Rhea began to plot a way to save just one child, the one who could finally change everything.
So we see this pattern again, the feminine forces of creation uniting against the destructive masculine tyrant. Gaia, the great-grandmother, came to Rhea in her darkest hour. She knew this pain all too well, and she whispered a plan. She told Rhea that her next child was the one destined to break the cycle. But it would require a level of deception that could fool the god of time himself.
So, as the time of her sixth birth approached, Rhea disappeared. She fled, traveling in total secrecy, with Gaia herself camouflaging her path. The very earth seemed to conspire to hide her from Cronus's all-seeing eyes. Her destination was a remote, wild island called Crete, a place of deep caves and ancient magic, far from the center of power. The perfect place to hide a revolution. And there, in the darkness of a cave deep inside Mount Dicte, Rhea gave birth to her last son. She named him
Zeus. His first cry was muffled by the mountain itself. He was immediately whisked away, hidden from the world, raised by nymphs and protected by fierce warrior spirits who would clash their shields whenever the baby cried so that the sound would be mistaken for thunder and never reach the ears of his father.
But the plan wasn't complete. Cronus was still expecting a baby to swallow, so Rhea did something brilliant. She found a large rock, about the size and weight of a newborn, and wrapped it in baby blankets. She then traveled back and presented this bundle to her husband, and Cronus, so consumed by his paranoia, so certain of the prophecy, didn't even bother to look. He just took the bundle and swallowed the rock whole. In that moment, he sealed his own fate. He thought he'd eaten his last rival, but all he'd done was swallow a lie, proving he was too blind to see the real threat that was now growing up far, far away.
Years passed. Zeus grew into a powerful, clever young god. When the time was right, he returned to the court of the Titans, but in disguise. He managed to get a job as his father's personal cupbearer. Then, with a little help from his mother, he prepared a special drink for Cronus, a powerful potion made from Gaia's own herbs. Cronus drank it down, and the effect was immediate and explosive. His body seized up, and he began to vomit. But he didn't just throw up the rock. One by one, his swallowed children came out. And they weren't babies. They emerged fully grown, fully armed, and absolutely furious. Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia. For the very first time, the 6 Olympian gods stood together, facing their father. In that moment, that was the declaration of a new war. The Great Titanomachy, a 10-year battle that would shake the cosmos to its foundations. In the end, as we know, Zeus and the Olympians would win. They would lock the Titans away in Tartarus and set up a new kingdom on Mount Olympus. But that leaves us with one huge, unsettling question, doesn't it? Zeus won by overthrowing his father, just as his father had done. He seized power through violence. So did he really break the cycle? Or did he just become the final link in the chain? It's a question that goes way beyond myth. It's a question about our own history, about our own nature, and whether the path to power almost always leads us back to the very tyrannies we fought to destroy.